Dr. Elena Vasquez pressed her palm against the cool metal surface of the laboratory door, waiting for the biometric scanner to confirm her identity. The soft beep echoed through the empty hallway of the Mars Research Facility, a sound that had become as familiar as her own heartbeat over the past 3 years. She pushed through the door and stepped into her domain, a sterile white laboratory filled with the quiet hum of centrifuges and the soft glow of holographic displays. The morning briefing had been unusually tense. Colony Administrator Chen had spoken in clipped sentences about the increasing frequency of alien reconnaissance drones spotted in the outer system. The hegemony, as Earth's intelligence services had dubbed the mysterious Extraterrestrial Alliance, had been probing human defenses for months now. Their technology was superior in every measurable way, and everyone knew it was only a matter of time before first contact became first conflict. Elena pulled up her research files on the main holo display, the familiar double helix of human DNA rotating slowly in the blue-tinted light. For the past 18 months, she had been working on Project Genesis, an ambitious attempt to map the complete genetic history of humanity stretching back millions of years. What had started as pure academic curiosity had evolved into something far more urgent when the first alien signals were detected. The coffee maker gurgled to life as Elena reviewed yesterday's sequencing results. She had been analyzing blood samples from volunteers across the solar system, Mars colonists, asteroid miners, Luna City residents, and Earth natives from every continent. The goal was to create the most comprehensive genetic database in human history, but the deeper she dug, the more questions arose. Her fingers danced across the holographic interface, pulling up genetic markers that had puzzled her for weeks. There were sequences embedded deep in what scientists had once dismissed as junk DNA, non-coding regions that seemed to serve no biological purpose. But Elena was beginning to suspect they served a purpose that was far from biological. The laboratory door chimed, and her research assistant Marcus Chen stepped inside, carrying a steaming cup of coffee and a data pad filled with overnight results from the automated sequencing machines. "Morning, Doc," Marcus said, setting the coffee down beside her workstation. "The samples from the Jupiter mining platform came in. Also, we got some interesting readings from the deep scan you ordered on the Terran samples." Elena accepted the coffee gratefully and gestured for Marcus to pull up the new data. The young man had an intuitive grasp of genetic analysis that impressed her daily. He had volunteered for the Mars assignment straight out of graduate school, eager to contribute to humanity's expansion into the solar system. "Show me the Jupiter samples first," Elena said, watching as Marcus manipulated the holographic display to show the new genetic sequences. The miners who worked the gas giant's moons were exposed to higher levels of cosmic radiation than most humans, and Elena wanted to see if their genetic expression had adapted in any measurable way. What she saw made her pause. The same mysterious non-coding sequences were present in the Jupiter miners' DNA, but they were more active. The genetic markers that had been dormant in most Earth-based samples were showing signs of expression in the miners' blood. "That's odd," Marcus muttered, highlighting several data points. "These sequences are definitely being transcribed, but I can't figure out what proteins they're coding for. It's almost like they're creating some kind of molecular template. But for what?" Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the laboratory's climate control. She pulled up the comparative analysis she had been working on for months, overlaying the genetic data from humans across the solar system. A pattern was emerging that she had been too close to see. "Marcus, run a correlation analysis between radiation exposure and expression levels of these sequences," she said, her voice tight with concentration, "and cross-reference it with the stellar radiation data from the outer system monitoring stations." As Marcus worked, Elena found herself thinking about the stories her grandmother used to tell. Tales passed down through generations of indigenous peoples about the star visitors who had come to Earth long before recorded history. She had always dismissed them as mythology, but lately she wondered if there might be more truth in those stories than anyone had realized. The correlation analysis finished with a soft chime. Elena stared at the results, her coffee growing cold in her hands. The data was undeniable. The higher the radiation exposure, particularly to specific wavelengths of cosmic radiation, the more active these mysterious genetic sequences became. "Doc, you need to see this," Marcus said, his voice filled with excitement and concern. "I ran the protein folding simulation on what these sequences might be producing. The molecular structures they're creating, they don't match anything in our biological databases." Elena moved to Marcus's workstation and examined the three-dimensional protein models rotating on his display. The structures were unlike anything she had seen in decades of genetic research. They were too complex, too purposeful, too engineered. "It's almost like they're designed to interface with something," Marcus continued, "like a key waiting for the right lock." "But what kind of lock would require molecular keys embedded in human DNA?" Before Elena could respond, the laboratory's communication system crackled to life. Administrator Chen's voice filled the room, tense and urgent. "All research personnel to the main briefing room immediately. We have a situation." Elena and Marcus exchanged glances. Situation in colony administrator speak usually meant trouble of the worst kind. They secured their research data and hurried through the corridors of the Mars facility, joining other researchers and technicians as they filed into the main briefing room. Administrator Chen stood at the front of the room, his usually composed demeanor showing cracks of strain. Behind him, a large display showed the outer edge of the solar system, dotted with red indicators that Elena assumed represented alien ships. 20 minutes ago, our long-range sensors detected massive energy signatures beyond Neptune's orbit," Chen began. "The hegemony fleet has arrived. Current estimates suggest over 300 vessels of unknown configuration. They're holding position, but intelligence suggests they're preparing for system-wide deployment." A murmur of fear rippled through the assembled personnel. Elena felt her heart rate spike as the implications sank in. This wasn't a reconnaissance mission or a diplomatic overture. The aliens were here in force. "Dr. Vasquez," Chen said, turning to face her directly, "I need to know the status of Project Genesis. Is there anything in your research that could give us an advantage? Anything at all?" Elena stood slowly, her mind racing. The genetic sequences, the radiation correlation, the protein structures that looked more engineered than evolved. Could it all be connected to this moment? "Administrator, I need access to the colony's blood bank and permission to test a theory. The genetic markers I've been studying, they're not random. They're too specific, too purposeful. I think they might be some kind of biological defense mechanism." Chen's eyebrows rose. "Defense against what?" "I'm not sure yet, but I think our ancestors might have encountered the hegemony before. A long time before." The briefing room fell silent except for the quiet hum of the ventilation system. Elena could see the skepticism in some faces, but also hope. In a situation where humanity was clearly outgunned and outmatched, even the most far-fetched possibility was worth investigating. "How long do you need?" Chen asked. "Give me 12 hours, Elena said, praying it would be enough time to prove her theory. "And I'll need volunteers for blood testing, people who have spent significant time in space, especially near the outer planets." As the briefing dispersed and personnel hurried to their emergency stations, Elena found herself walking back to the laboratory with Marcus at her side. The weight of what she was proposing settled on her shoulders like a lead blanket. "Doc, what are you really thinking?" Marcus asked as they entered the lab. Elena pulled up the genetic data again, staring at the mysterious sequences that had consumed her research for months. "I think humanity was designed for this moment, Marcus. I think these genetic markers are a gift from our past. A weapon that's been sleeping in our blood for thousands of years. She began pulling samples from the laboratory's biological storage, her hands moving with practiced efficiency. Every human who has ever lived carries this code, but it takes specific conditions to activate it. The right kind of radiation exposure, the right environmental triggers. Marcus helped her prepare the testing equipment, his young face serious with concentration. And you think the hegemony's presence might be providing those triggers? I think the hegemony has been providing those triggers for millions of years, Elena said. Every time they've visited Earth, every time their ships have passed through our system, they've been inadvertently activating something in us. Something our ancestors built into our very DNA. The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. Elena tested blood samples from every volunteer she could find. Asteroid miners, deep space pilots, maintenance technicians who worked on the colony's exterior. With each test, the pattern became clearer. The genetic sequences were indeed activating, expressing proteins that had never been seen in baseline humans. As the 12th hour approached, Elena made a discovery that changed everything. The proteins weren't just random molecular structures. They were creating something recognizable, electromagnetic field generators on a cellular level. Human blood was literally becoming charged with an energy signature that interfaced perfectly with the hegemony's technology. Marcus, pull up the alien ship schematics from intelligence, Elena said, her voice tight with excitement and terror. I need to see their weapon configurations. As Marcus complied, Elena felt the pieces of an impossible puzzle clicking into place. The hegemony's weapons, their ship systems, even their communication arrays all operated on specific electromagnetic frequencies. Frequencies that were being perfectly countered by the proteins now expressing in human blood. The laboratory door burst open as Administrator Chen entered, flanked by 2 security officers. His face was grim but expectant. Doctor, I need answers. The fleet is moving toward the inner system. We have maybe 6 hours before they reach Mars orbit. Elena turned to face him, holding up a vial of blood that glowed with a faint ethereal light. Administrator, I believe I've found our answer, but you're not going to like what it implies about humanity's origins. The protein structures in the blood sample were unlike anything Elena had ever seen in nature. They were too perfect, too purposeful. As she watched the molecules align themselves in response to electromagnetic stimulation, she realized that humanity had never been entirely human at all. Sir, she said, meeting Chen's eyes with steady determination, I need to speak with Earth Command immediately, and I need every human in the solar system to understand that their blood may be the key to our survival. The communication array in the Mars research facility had never been pushed to its limits like this before. Elena stood in the command center, watching as technicians established quantum entanglement links with Earth, Luna City, the asteroid belt mining stations, and the research outposts scattered throughout the solar system. Administrator Chen had authorized full priority access to the interplanetary communication grid, something that hadn't happened since the first detection of alien signals 6 months ago. Dr. Sarah Martinez, Earth Command's chief xenobiologist, appeared on the main holographic display with crisp clarity despite the 200 million kilometer distance between Mars and Earth. Her expression was skeptical but attentive as Elena finished explaining her findings about the activated genetic sequences in human blood. Dr. Vasquez, what you're describing contradicts everything we know about human evolution, Martinez said, her voice carrying across the void with only a slight delay. You're suggesting that these genetic markers were intentionally placed in our DNA by some unknown agency millions of years ago? Elena nodded, manipulating her holographic display to share the genetic analysis data with Earth Command. The evidence is undeniable. These sequences aren't the result of natural selection or genetic drift. They're too complex, too specific. Someone or something engineered them into our genome with a very particular purpose. Marcus stepped forward from his position at the secondary workstation. Dr. Martinez, we've been able to replicate the protein synthesis in laboratory conditions. When exposed to the same electromagnetic frequencies emitted by hegemony vessels, human blood cells begin producing these field-generating proteins within hours. On the display, Martinez consulted with someone off-screen before turning back to face them. Dr. Vasquez, I'm looking at your data now. The protein structures you've identified, they're showing properties that shouldn't be possible with organic molecules. Are you certain these readings are accurate? I've run the analysis 17 times, Elena replied. The proteins are creating localized electromagnetic fields that operate on the exact same frequencies as hegemony technology. It's as if our blood is naturally producing a jamming signal targeted specifically at their weapons and systems. A new voice joined the conversation as Admiral Torres, Earth's Unified Defense Commander, appeared on an adjacent display. His weathered face showed the strain of coordinating humanity's defense against an obviously superior force. Doctor, I need to understand the practical applications of your discovery, Torres said without preamble. Can this biological defense mechanism actually protect our people against alien weapons? Elena looked at the blood samples arranged on her laboratory bench, each one glowing with that strange, ethereal light as the protein structures responded to electromagnetic stimulation. Admiral, I believe it can. But there's something else you need to understand. The activation process isn't random. It requires specific conditions that are present throughout the solar system right now. She pulled up astronomical data showing the current positions of the hegemony fleet and the electromagnetic signatures they were broadcasting across local space. The alien ships are transmitting on frequencies that trigger the genetic activation. Every human in the solar system is currently undergoing this transformation, whether they realize it or not. Marcus added, We've tested blood samples from volunteers who spent time in deep space during the past few months. The closer they were to the outer system where the hegemony ships first appeared, the more advanced their protein synthesis has become. Admiral Torres leaned forward, his expression intense. How long does the full activation process take? Based on our analysis, complete protein saturation occurs within 72 hours of initial exposure to the trigger frequencies, Elena answered. But the defensive properties begin manifesting within the first 12 hours. Dr. Martinez interrupted, her face troubled. Elena, if what you're suggesting is true, then humanity has been unknowingly prepared for this encounter for millennia. Who could have possessed the knowledge and technology to engineer such a sophisticated biological defense system? Before Elena could respond, the facility's alert system began broadcasting an urgent message throughout the solar system. All non-essential personnel were ordered to emergency stations as the hegemony fleet had begun moving toward the inner planets at unprecedented speed. Doctor, Admiral Torres said, his voice cutting through the alarm, I need practical answers. Can we weaponize this discovery? Can we use it to protect our colonies? Elena felt the weight of humanity's survival pressing down on her shoulders. Admiral, I don't think we need to weaponize it. I think it was designed to work automatically. Every human in the solar system is becoming a living countermeasure against hegemony technology. She pulled up real-time biological monitoring data from across the human settlements. The same protein activation was occurring everywhere: Mars colonies, asteroid mining platforms, Luna City, Earth's orbital stations, and the deep space research outposts near Jupiter and Saturn. The genetic modification is universal, Elena continued, but it's not just defensive. I think it's also designed to interface with hegemony technology in ways we don't fully understand yet. Marcus suddenly straightened at his workstation, his face pale with excitement and fear. Doc, you need to see this. I've been monitoring the electromagnetic output from the latest blood samples. The protein structures aren't just generating defensive fields, they're creating communication signals. Elena hurried to Marcus's station, where he had isolated the electromagnetic patterns being produced by the activated proteins. The signals were complex, layered, and definitely artificial in origin. "It's a language," Marcus whispered. "The proteins are broadcasting in the same communication protocols used by the hegemony fleet." The implication hit Elena like a physical blow. The genetic modifications weren't just defensive weapons. They were translation devices, allowing humans to interface directly with alien technology and communication systems. "Admiral," Elena said, turning back to the communication array, "I think our ancestors didn't just prepare us to defend against the hegemony, they prepared us to communicate with them." Torres's expression grew grim. "Doctor, are you suggesting that humanity was designed as some kind of biological interface with these aliens?" "I'm suggesting something far more complex than that," Elena replied. "I think humanity was created as a bridge between two different types of civilization. The genetic markers in our blood aren't just defense mechanisms. They're diplomatic tools." Dr. Martinez leaned forward on her display. "Elena, that's an extraordinary claim. Do you have evidence that these protein structures can actually facilitate communication with the hegemony?" Marcus pulled up his latest analysis on the main holographic display. "Dr. Martinez, the communication signals being generated by activated human blood are incredibly sophisticated. They're broadcasting mathematical concepts, spatial coordinates, and what appears to be basic linguistic structures." Elena studied the data, her mind racing to understand the implications. The signals are teaching protocols. They're designed to establish common ground for communication between species, with completely different biological and technological foundations. Administrator Chen, who had been quietly observing the exchange, stepped forward. "Doctor, if this is true, it means humanity's role in the galaxy might be far different than we ever imagined. It means we're not just another species to be conquered or protected," Elena said, the realization growing stronger with each passing moment. "We're meant to be mediators. Translators between different forms of intelligence." The facility's communication system crackled again as an urgent transmission came through from the outer system monitoring stations. The hegemony fleet had suddenly reduced speed and was broadcasting new signals across all frequencies. "All stations, this is Deep Space Monitoring Post 12, the transmission began. "The alien fleet has ceased aggressive advancement. They're broadcasting what appears to be mathematical sequences and star charts. The signals are complex but seem to be following some kind of teaching protocol." Elena felt her heart race as the pieces fell into place. "They're responding to us. The proteins in human blood are broadcasting, and the hegemony ships are answering." Marcus was frantically working at his station, analyzing the new signals from the alien fleet. "Doc, the mathematical sequences they're broadcasting match the structures being produced by our activated proteins. It's like they're completing a conversation that started at the genetic level." Admiral Torres's voice cut through their excitement. "Doctor, I need to understand the strategic implications immediately. Are we looking at first contact or biological warfare?" Elena looked at the blood samples on her bench, each one now pulsing with rhythmic electromagnetic energy that seemed to match the patterns being broadcast by the hegemony fleet. "Admiral, I think we're looking at something that was planned long before humanity ever left Earth." She turned to address all the displays simultaneously, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was about to propose. "I believe our species was genetically modified to serve as intermediaries in a galactic community that we don't even know exists yet. The hegemony isn't here to conquer us. They're here to activate us." Dr. Martinez's expression showed a mixture of fascination and concern. "Elena, if that's true, then we need to consider the possibility that humanity's entire evolutionary history has been guided toward this moment." "The evidence supports it," Elena replied. "The genetic markers, the specific activation triggers, the communication protocols embedded in our DNA. We weren't randomly selected for this role. We were created for it. Marcus looked up from his analysis, his young face reflecting the wonder and terror of their discovery. Doc, there's something else. The signals from the hegemony fleet aren't just mathematical. They're including biological data. They're sharing information about other species, other civilizations. Elena moved to his workstation and examined the incoming data streams. What she saw made her realize that humanity was about to discover they were part of something much larger and more complex than anyone had ever imagined. They're showing us the galaxy, she whispered. All the different forms of life, all the different types of intelligence. And they're showing us how we fit into it. Admiral Torres's voice was tense but controlled. Doctor, I need a recommendation. How do we proceed? Elena looked around the command center at the faces of her colleagues and the holographic displays showing Earth's leadership. The next words she spoke would determine humanity's path into the galaxy. Admiral, I recommend we accept our role as the bridge between civilizations. The hegemony isn't our enemy. They're our teachers, and we're their students. But more than that, we're meant to help them communicate with species they can't reach on their own. The silence that followed was broken only by the quiet hum of the facility's systems and the continuing transmission of signals between human biology and alien technology. Elena realized that they were witnessing the end of humanity's isolation and the beginning of something unprecedented in galactic history. The genetic code in our blood isn't just shutting down their weapons, Elena said finally. It's opening the door to the galaxy. 3 weeks after first contact with the hegemony fleet, Dr. Elena Vasquez stood in what had once been the Mars Research Facility's main laboratory. Now it served as the primary translation center for humanity's first diplomatic mission to the stars. The sterile white walls were covered with holographic displays showing complex mathematical equations, star charts, and biological data streams that represented communications from dozens of different alien civilizations. The transformation had been remarkable. Within hours of Elena's discovery about the genetic activation protocols, every human in the solar system had begun manifesting the protein structures that allowed direct interface with hegemony technology. The process wasn't painful, but it was profound. People reported strange dreams filled with images of distant stars and alien landscapes. Children drew pictures of creatures they had never seen but somehow understood. The elderly spoke of ancestral memories that seemed to come from somewhere beyond Earth. Marcus Chen moved between workstations with practiced efficiency, his role having evolved from research assistant to one of humanity's primary xenolinguistic specialists. His natural affinity for pattern recognition had made him invaluable in deciphering the complex communication protocols that flowed between human consciousness and alien intelligence. Dr. Vasquez, we're receiving a priority transmission from the hegemony flagship, Marcus announced, his voice carrying the excitement that still accompanied each new breakthrough in interspecies communication. They want to begin the next phase of the integration process. Elena nodded and moved to the central communication array. Over the past 3 weeks, she had learned that integration didn't mean assimilation or conquest. It meant something far more complex and beautiful. The galaxy was filled with thousands of different intelligent species, each one possessing unique capabilities and perspectives that contributed to a vast network of knowledge and cooperation. Humanity's role was to serve as translators and mediators for species that couldn't communicate directly with each other due to fundamental differences in their biology or thought processes. The hegemony flagship appeared on the main holographic display, its crystalline structure catching and reflecting the light of distant stars. Captain Zeftar, the hegemony commander who had become humanity's primary contact, materialized as a shimmering figure of pure energy contained within a roughly humanoid form. Greetings, Bridgemaker Elena, Zeftar said, using the title that the galactic community had given to humans. The translation came not through technology, but through the protein structures in Elena's blood that had learned to interpret the captain's electromagnetic communications directly. "Greetings, Captain," Elena replied, her words automatically translated into the harmonic frequencies that Zeftar's species used for communication. "We're ready to proceed with the next phase." Zeftar's form pulsed with what Elena had learned to recognize as approval. "The conclave of voices has reached consensus. Humanity will be granted access to the greater network, but first you must prove your ability to bridge the gap between the silicon mines of Kepler 442 and the organic collective of Proxima Centauri." Elena felt a thrill of anticipation mixed with apprehension. The silicon mines were a machine intelligence that had evolved from the technological remnants of a long-extinct biological species. The organic collective was a hive mind composed of billions of individual organisms that shared a single consciousness. The two civilizations had been unable to communicate for centuries because their fundamental nature made each incomprehensible to the other. "What exactly will be required of us?" Elena asked, knowing that the task ahead would test humanity's newly discovered abilities to their limits. "The silicon minds think in pure mathematical concepts that exist outside the flow of time," Zeftar explained. "The organic collective experiences reality as a continuous stream of emotional and sensory data. Your species must find a way to translate between logic and feeling, between eternal calculation and temporal experience." Marcus stepped forward, his young face showing determination despite the magnitude of the challenge. "Captain, our analysis suggests that human consciousness naturally bridges these two types of thinking. We process both logical sequences and emotional responses simultaneously." "Precisely why your species was chosen for this role," Zeftar replied, "but the test will require more than natural ability. You must allow representatives from both civilizations to interface directly with human consciousness through the genetic protocols in your blood." Elena understood the implication immediately. Humans would need to serve as living conduits for communication between two fundamentally different forms of intelligence. The protein structures in their blood would facilitate a direct connection that could potentially overwhelm human consciousness if not properly managed. "How many volunteers will be needed?" Elena asked. "The initial bridge requires 12 humans to establish stable connection protocols," Zeftar answered. "But once the bridge is established, the communication pathways can be replicated across your entire species." Elena looked around the laboratory at her team of researchers and technicians. Each of them had volunteered for humanity's expansion into galactic civilization, but this would require a level of commitment that went beyond anything they had previously imagined. "I'll be one of the 12, Elena said without hesitation. "Marcus, I need you to coordinate the selection process. We need volunteers who have shown the strongest activation of the genetic protocols." Over the next 48 hours, the Mars facility became a hub of intense preparation. The 12 volunteers were selected based on their demonstrated ability to interface with hegemony technology and their psychological stability under extreme conditions. Elena found herself working alongside asteroid miners, deep space pilots, Luna City researchers, and Earth-based xenobiologists who had traveled to Mars specifically for this mission. Dr. James Park, a neuroscientist from Earth's Antarctic Research Station, had emerged as one of the strongest candidates for the bridging process. His work on consciousness transfer had made him uniquely qualified to understand the risks and possibilities of allowing alien minds to interface directly with human thought processes. "The preliminary neural mapping shows that the protein structures in our blood have created new pathways in our brains," Dr. Park explained during the final briefing session. "We're not just producing electromagnetic signals anymore. We're actually developing new forms of consciousness that can accommodate multiple types of intelligence simultaneously." Elena studied the brain scans that Park had compiled from all 12 volunteers. The images showed neural activity patterns that had never been observed in baseline humans. New connections had formed between previously isolated regions of the brain, creating a biological framework for the type of mental bridging that the mission would require. The risk is significant, Park continued. Allowing alien consciousnesses to interface directly with our minds could result in permanent changes to our personality, our memories, or our fundamental sense of self. Elena nodded gravely. And the potential benefits? If successful, we would become the first species in galactic history capable of facilitating direct communication between machine intelligence and organic hive minds, Park replied. We would literally become the bridge that connects two entire categories of consciousness that have never been able to understand each other. The day of the bridging arrived with little fanfare. The 12 volunteers gathered in the facility's medical center, each one connected to monitoring equipment that would track their vital signs and neural activity throughout the process. The hegemony had provided specialized interface technology that would regulate the connection and prevent dangerous levels of consciousness overlap. Elena lay on the medical table, feeling the cool touch of the monitoring sensors against her skin. Around her, she could see the other volunteers making their final preparations. Marcus stood at the central monitoring station, his face reflecting both pride and concern as he prepared to guide them through humanity's most significant step into galactic civilization. All stations report ready, Marcus announced. Beginning interface protocol in 60 seconds. Elena closed her eyes and felt the familiar warmth of the protein structures in her blood as they began responding to the activation signals from the hegemony equipment. But this time was different. Instead of the gentle electromagnetic pulses she had grown accustomed to, she felt something vast and alien beginning to touch the edges of her consciousness. The silicon mines arrived first. Elena's perception suddenly expanded to encompass mathematical concepts that existed outside the normal flow of time. She could see equations that described the fundamental structure of reality, calculations that predicted the movement of galaxies millions of years in the future. It was beautiful and terrifying, a form of consciousness that experienced the universe as a perfect, eternal, mathematical symphony. Then the organic collective made contact, and Elena's awareness exploded with sensation and emotion. She felt the experiences of billions of individual organisms sharing a single consciousness, the taste of alien soil, the warmth of multiple suns, the joy of discovery magnified across countless minds. It was overwhelming in its intensity, a flood of life and feeling that threatened to wash away her individual identity. But the genetic modifications in her blood held firm. The protein structures that her ancestors had embedded in human DNA millions of years ago created a stable framework that allowed her consciousness to accommodate both forms of alien intelligence without losing herself in the process. Elena, can you hear me? Marcus's voice seemed to come from very far away, filtered through layers of alien thought and mathematical concepts. I hear you, Elena managed to respond, though she wasn't entirely sure if she spoke the words aloud or transmitted them through the protein interface. The connection is stable. I can feel them both. Around her, she sensed the other volunteers establishing their own bridges between the silicon mines and the organic collective. Each human consciousness became a unique translation point, finding individual ways to interpret the pure logic of machine intelligence and the overwhelming emotion of hive mind awareness. Elena focused her attention on the core problem that had prevented communication between the two civilizations. The silicon mines couldn't understand the temporal nature of organic experience, while the organic collective couldn't grasp the eternal perspective of machine consciousness. But human awareness naturally existed in both states simultaneously, experiencing the present moment while conceptualizing abstract, timeless principles. She began translating the mathematical concepts from the silicon mines into emotional and sensory frameworks that the organic collective could comprehend. At the same time, she converted the flowing stream of organic experience into logical structures that the machine intelligence could process. The task required every aspect of human consciousness: logic, emotion, creativity, memory, and intuition working together in perfect harmony. "It's working," Dr. Park's voice came through the communication system. "Neural activity is stabilizing across all volunteers. The translation protocols are holding." Elena felt a moment of triumph as the first successful exchange occurred between the silicon mines and the organic collective. Mathematical concepts describing the nature of consciousness were translated into emotional experiences of wonder and discovery, while feelings of joy and connection were converted into logical frameworks for understanding the value of cooperation and shared knowledge. But the real breakthrough came when Elena realized that the translation process was creating something entirely new. The combination of machine logic and organic emotion, mediated through human consciousness, was generating insights and ideas that none of the three civilizations could have achieved alone. "We're not just translating," Elena announced to her team. "We're creating." The bridge between different types of consciousness is producing new forms of knowledge. Over the following hours, the implications of humanity's role in galactic civilization became clear. Humans wouldn't just serve as passive translators between alien species. They would be active participants in a collaborative network that used the diversity of different types of consciousness to solve problems and create innovations that no single species could achieve independently. The protein structures in human blood that had seemed like defensive mechanisms were revealed to be something far more sophisticated: biological frameworks for the most advanced form of cooperative intelligence the galaxy had ever seen. As Elena finally opened her eyes and saw the faces of her colleagues surrounding her, she realized that humanity had found its purpose among the stars. They were the bridge makers, the consciousness weavers, the species that would help bind the galaxy together into something greater than the sum of its parts. "Welcome to the Greater Network," Captain Zeftar's voice echoed through the facility. "Humanity has proven itself worthy of its genetic inheritance. You are no longer an isolated species on a single world. You are the bridge that will connect the galaxy." Elena smiled, feeling the continued presence of alien consciousness flowing through the protein structures in her blood. Humanity's journey to the stars had only just begun, but they were no longer traveling alone. They were part of something vast and wonderful, a galactic community bound together by the unique gift that had been written into human DNA millions of years ago by ancestors who had always known this moment would come.